Good afternoon. Welcome to the session on subcontracting operations and activities in manufacturing. We're going to need every minute, so we'll start right on time. My name is Konrad Volkmann. I'm program management lead for the manufacturing team in Copenhagen, responsible for the development of the manufacturing, planning, resource and activity and product area of AX. And with me I have Johan Hoffmann, program manager responsible for production and manufacturing execution, and Anders Evenkirke, responsible for the cost accounting part in AX. Together we're going to walk you through an end-to-end scenario in two flavors today. And it all starts at a company. Tony, the production manager, is responsible for a company that does subcontracting operations. And he does that in one product line. He does that using the production orders, so basically subcontracting an operation. In another context, he is doing this with a lean manufacturing configuration. So we will show you two almost similar versions of subcontracting, basically the same business scenario in two flavors today. So obviously, Tony has to work with a team. The process engineer who actually designs and documents the manufacturing processes is responsible for designing the routes and the BOMs for discrete or the production flow and activities for the lean manufacturing part. I'm going to play that role today. And then we have Lars, shop floor supervisor, that does the operative load balancing between the available resources. So we actually walk through a scenario where you have two alternative subcontractors and an in-house manufacturing option as well. So Lars is responsible to load balance the jobs and the production orders between these three options. Then Ahmed, the water spider, he needs to manage moving the material between the operations. In case of subcontracting, that means he has to prepare to send them out to the subcontractor, get it back, register the receipt for the subcontractor, bring it to the next work cell. And finally, Ken, the cost accounting, that is the role that Anders is going to play, who actually calculates the different cost measurements for that and prepares the cost accounting and does the afterwards determine what variances have been occurring. So let's walk into what we are going to do in detail in this session. So I'm going to walk you through the business scenario, which is basically the same for both. And then I'll start with explaining the configuration, BOM, and route for subcontracting. In discrete manufacturing, Anders is going to explain the cost configuration and calculation. Then our friend Johan will go on, do some create the production orders, do scheduling, ordering of the subcontracting activities. Ahmed is staging the material, bring it out to the subcontractor, then reporting the production orders, and finally some cost evaluation. The same then in the second run on the activity-based subcontracting, which is based on lean manufacturing, the configuration of the production flow and activities, the cost configuration. We're going to look at how this would work in scheduling and ordering in that case, material staging, production reporting, and finally, if we get time, a little look into the cost. We may not be able to do that. So the business scenario, let's go a little bit one step back. Why is subcontracting so important? I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Basically, you probably know that just as well. So load balancing of internal resources is one thing we want to show here. Then obviously cost could be a driver. Special equipment or expertise is often a driver of doing subcontracting, or regional coverage of certain operations, leveraging enterprise structures and capabilities. That basically means subcontracting can also occur in an enterprise. So you have multiple companies in an enterprise, multiple sites. One is a subcontractor for the other. That can happen as well. And one thing we also have to say, subcontracting often occurs if you have dynamic changes, rapid occurring needs, where you don't have the time to actually ramp up your own capability and resources. So you might actually need a subcontractor to do something for you in the time where you build up these capabilities. We also had a customer who had a disaster where the neighboring plant exploded and burned down half of his plant as well. So they were actually able within 4 weeks to reorganize their production with subcontracting to bridge the time until the plant was built back. Things like that is something that will drive subcontracting. Just to make sure we're talking about the same terms, I just explained the terms again, what I'm talking about in this session. So subcontracting operations and activities, what we're talking about here is the vendor is paid for the work contributed by the vendor. And so for the vendor-owned resources, but the material ownership stays with the customer in that case, so with the main production company. So the vendor is not owning, is not buying the semi-finished or the materials. He's just providing an operation and gets paid for that operation. So material ownership is typically not transferred to the vendor. There are also cases where this is done, but then we don't really talk about subcontracting as such, or in that sense. Then he's basically paid for an item that comes in when the ownership changes again. And semi-finished products is something, when I talk about a semi-finished, it's a product that does not have reached their final state to be sold or universally used. That means that typically it doesn't have to have an own BOM level. That is not always clear because in many cases people build BOM levels for that for handling reasons. In the case we're doing today, we're not having a BOM level for the semi-finished. So the material that's sent out to the subcontractor to be continued working on is a semi-finished, and we get a semi-finished back. It doesn't have a BOM level, it's between two BOM levels. So it doesn't actually have a unique ID number. And we show how the two different cases will actually treat these cases. Sometimes this stage is also referred to as WIP. Some people call it WIP. A couple of best practices in subcontracting. There is contract-based versus ad hoc subcontracting. I mean, if you want to do a stable flow, then usually, and also lead to shorter lead times as such, then usually the contract-based subcontracting is the better one, because you don't want to start negotiating when you need to do a job. But obviously there's both concepts could be applied. In the model we're doing today, we're looking more at the contract-based subcontracting. The other question in subcontracting is how much does the vendor directly interact with your system? So is it something, are you exchanging data with EDI, or do you actually offer the vendor a portal to actually type in things, type in feedback, type in recognition? We're not using any of these today in the scenario. We're basically assuming that we're registering what's going out and what's coming in, and basically with that, tracking what has happened at the subcontractor. And then integrated logistics. On the ad hoc subcontracting, you would probably need an individual transport. In a contract-based subcontracting, you might actually have something like a milk run, where like every day a truck gets out, moves material and semi-finished to the subcontractor, brings back whatever he has done. In our case, we're using that scenario today. Basically, we're saying, okay, might be a milk run with two subcontractors, it actually goes to both. So I'm preparing the material for both and getting it back. So this is the scenario we're going to look at. We have three main operations: pre-assembly, coating, and finish. And the coating can be done either internally or at vendor US 801 or vendor US 802. And we basically using a milk run to provision both vendors with the material and the semi-finished, and getting back the semi-finished, the coated semi-finished from them. The BOM that we're using, so we have in the pre-assembly we're consuming two components. In the coating we're consuming, besides the semi-finished, yet two other components. And then we have a finish that only consumes the semi-finished. On top of that, the coating service that actually represents the value of the work that the subcontractor adds is also related to the coating. Yes?
How are the two things consumed at the vendor getting to the vendor?
There's multiple options to that. In our case, for the discrete manufacturing, we're using the picking list. So basically, on the picking list, you actually send it down with a semi-finished. So the second one, so that is valid for the H202 component. The H250 is purchased from the vendor 802. So it's actually one of my subcontractors. So this subcontractor, I don't actually need to do it. And there's actually one variant. We're not showing that today because of lack of time, but there's actually an option in the system that you can say, if this line is also subcontracted from the same vendor, I can put it on the same purchase order, which would, on the item arrival, would automatically post the arrival and the consumption against your production order. So that's a very, very, very neat functionality. I'm going to show you how it's set up in the BOM. We won't have the time to actually walk through all branches of the scenario. So there's a third option, is that you're using transfer orders or Kanbans to replenish the subcontractor. And this Kanban option can also be combined with the discrete manufacturing case. So basically, yeah, I'm going to show you that on the setup of the BOM and routes. So let's go into that. Let me show you how we configured BOMs and routes and resources for this scenario. Are there? Yeah, great. So I'm going to go to look into the resource groups first. And you can see we have defined a couple of resource groups. Everything around 8.1 and 8.2 is what we're looking at. So we have the resource group for pre-assembly that on the site 1 that consumes from warehouse 11. We have the internal coating consuming from warehouse 12, and the subcontracting finish also consuming from warehouse 12. Alternatively, we have the two subcontracting work cells. So for each of the subcontractor, I have created an own work cell, and they're running on an own warehouse, each of them. So there is a vendor-managed warehouse. So this warehouse is representing the vendor 801. It's tied to that vendor. Also have basically one location to make use the location functionality. And I have the same thing for the second vendor, the coding at the second vendor. Each of them have basically one resource assigned to, which is the resource, which is in this case a vendor resource. So let's go from the BOMs and resources. So each of the resource group had one.
There's a question there.
Yeah.
Is it in general possible to use one resource group for both?
It is in general possible, but the warehouse relation is on the resource group.
So you always have to set up.
So you should actually have a resource group per vendor if you wanna use this location, and that's actually quite important because you have this own warehouse. This is what enables me to say if I need to move material to that vendor with transfer orders, I can set this up in my supply configuration that this location is provisioned by transfer orders. So my demand planning can also look into that and say, okay, this is what I want to do at this vendor. How much material do I need to do that to move there, or even purchase it there? So in this case, I have different settings per item. So certain items are purchased directly to that warehouse. On that warehouse, I have a specific address. So the purchase order to that warehouse actually says to the customer, ship it to the vendor.
Yeah, but it blows up master data.
It blows up master data to a certain extent. Well, it depends on whether you need that control and that detail. I think you could maybe simplify that if you need less control and less detailed in the material management.
Short question. Would
Yeah.
you recommend to use, let's say, one warehouse, supplier warehouse, and then for let's say, more than one supplier?
I'm doing one per vendor because if you start getting into EDI, You might want to exchange things like counting journals and stuff with the vendor. Then how do you do that? I mean, you want to have a clear vision that at this vendor, this is what I have sitting at this vendor. I mean, you should have at least one inventory dimension that actually tells you what is the material sitting there. I mean, it's stuff that you own that is outside of your company. If you throw everything into one big bulk, how do you follow? How do you track? How do you do inventory counting? You maybe make it a mail on inventory counting. How do you adjust that if it's not by vendor?
Using the zones at the locations by zone?
No, don't. We consciously didn't use wax for this because this is cross warehouse. So it's a different discussion, and I don't want to go into that discussion today. How you could use warehouse replenishment alternatively. That's yet another scenario we would need to look at. So let me move on with the BOM. So I'm going to show you the product, which is quite simple. So looking at the BOM, we actually created multiple versions of that for a specific reason. So the simple internal BOM looks like this. I have 4 components. You saw that before. 2 components are consumed in the first operation. 2 components are consumed in the second operation. For simplicity reasons, we actually have created a specific BOM version per subcontractor here. Basically, to say we configure it really specifically to that. And one of the reasons is that the provisioning of the material in this case is different for the 2 subcontractors. The really important part is that on the subcontracting BOM, what's actually added for discrete manufacturing, we get a line with a service. This is an inventory service item, as we call it. So this service is added to the BOM, and this BOM line has the line type vendor and the operation 20, which is the second operation that we're actually using. It has the vendor account directly associated to. And if I'm showing you the second one, then what is kind of different is that this line here is also of type vendor. That was what I was talking about earlier. If I'm doing that, then the purchase order I'm creating and the item arrival I'm posting for the receipt of the semi-finished would automatically also post the receipt and the consumption of this component. So I can actually separate the purchase of the service and the component in 2 lines for the subcontractor. For that case where I'm on top of the service, I'm also purchasing certain items from the subcontractor in this case. And then we did a last version that we're using for cost calculation. So we have in this case, we assume we have a distribution. We do 50% in-house, 25% subcontractor 1, 25% subcontractor 2. And to do a cost calculation in this case, for our standard cost for the end product that actually has a mixed approach, we have this BOM version that has only 5 services for 10 items. So only half of them use a service. The same setup is also existing on the route side. So I have multiple routes. I have an internal one, very simple. Primary, first pre-assembly coating. And the now really important or interesting part here is that on this one, this is also the default that I'm using for planning. Where my plant orders run into, I have modeled this as with a capability. So my plant orders can actually use these 3 applicable resources. So it's going to create plant orders and load level between the 3 resources. So my plant orders can actually tell me, if I'm looking at the plant order, which resource has been taken. Based on that, I can then go and firm my production orders for one of the 3 options. However, for simplicity reasons, to make it easier for Lars or for Johan, we have prepared a specific BOM that he can use to firm because else he would need to firm and go back and change the vendor there. It's kind of a little bit, it's easier to actually prepare it like that. So in this case, you can see that it only has a specific resource group in that case that it's actually allowed to use. And we have actually a different route group. And this is a subcontracted operation now. Again, we also have a costing version of that. That is a little bit more complicated than that, because in the costing version, I actually have to line up all options to make a mixed cost. So I have two operations here. I have the the subcontracted operation here and the internal operation. The funny thing is that it behaves differently. If I want to calculate 5 subcontracted and 5 internally done, then for some reason the process quantity for the subcontracting is 5, the process quantity for the other is 20. Don't ask me why, but that's the way it works. This is only used for the cost calculation. And that's Anna's point. Yep. So he's going to show you the cost calculation configuration.
So this is where I will jump in. So the idea with the different bombs were that where I was sitting here as a cost controller and talking with our manufacturing manager, saying that we don't have capacity enough to actually do the coding in-house. And we still have a target price on our finished good. And to invest in a new coding operation unit, simply the investment is too big. It cannot live within our target cost of $10 as a sales price. So we cannot absorb that investment, so we had to go for vendors to figure out if we can actually buy the coding from our vendors. So we did the 3 bombs where we do 50-50, because this is the capacity we believe we still have in-house. And then we go and we'll figure out if we buy 50% of the capacity for this coding, what will the cost be versus if we were doing it internally. So let me go to the costing version that I've created for this. So I have 3 costing versions. I have the one here for 2015, which is the one with my 50-50%. And as such, we don't support that entirely when you're defining it. You can only define it in the BOM, and you need to build a complex BOM that Conrad showed you. And what is the consequence? The consequence really is that when we produce, it will actually create quantity variances. So let's say I have a BOM with 50-50, and I actually do an internal production. I will get quantity variances on my subcontracting component of my BOM. So I will lose something as a cost controller if I go into every single production order and want to look at the variances, because I will get quantity variances if I didn't subcontract. Or if I subcontract, I will get variances on the in-house. But I can live with that as a cost controller because I want to look at not one production order, but over a period of time to see, did we actually do a 50-50 production? And if I do that, over time, these variances will eat up each other. And then I can look at the variances of the product as a whole. And I can also see by that, did we actually source and produce this item as we expected, 50-50? But I will lose some of the details on every single production order. But I don't really care about a single production order. I care about a broader picture over time. So if we look at this costing version, we can see the price that we calculated for our finished good, which is our D here. And the price here is 7.78 for one piece. And this is our cost calculation BOM. That means this is the 50-50 split. If I go to the internal in-house production costing version that I created, we can see here that the price for that BOM gives us a price of 7.14. So it is cheaper to do the production in-house, but I don't have the capacity. If I want to compare the prices to see it against our 50-50, we have this new report here. If I go to the price compare, and I can execute it and compare this costing version cost price for this specific product against the active one in this case, because I already activated the 50-50 cost.
Question.
Yes?
Who is that report?
That is released in R3. And if I go and look at the report here, and I've in this report only said I only want to look at the cost group types, And if we go to the end of the report and see the net difference between the two calculations, we can see here that we have differences in the direct outsourcing, because the in-house do not have any subcontracting, where the 50/50 has half of cost for subcontracting. And therefore, we can also see that there's a difference in the direct manufacturing cost, because I don't have that operation in my 50/50, only half of the cost of that. So that is why I can see the differences in the cost, and I can evaluate it. And if we look at the cost on the in-house, we can still see, if we look at the cost of the 50/50, we can still see that I actually can still manage my target cost of $10. I could have done it cheaper, but again, the extra cost for investing in this operation in-house to get more capacity and I need to go a cost accounting module to do a fixed asset purchase and depreciation to calculate what extra cost it is. But let's say I've done that in an Excel sheet, could see that I will potentially go over my $10 as target cost. So if we close this down, one little thing more to remember when you do discrete subcontracting is, I need to close this. So one little thing you need to do and remember when you do subcontracting and then discrete manufacturing is that the service item has to be configured specifically for that purpose. And it is correct, it is an inventoried service item that you're creating, because we're using the inventrans to move the cost from not inventoried items, so to speak, into WIP. So when you do the setup, I will just do it and show it in 2 seconds here on the posting profile, because I've seen many customers actually make this mistake when they do subcontracting. So the service item, when we purchase it, and we see it here. So the product received account here, where for all my other items that are inventoried items, I have put an expenditure account. So when I do the purchase order, I actually expire the cost to my profit or loss. And the production order, when you will see your hand doing the production order, it will automatically actually pick it and absorb it into WIP. So that happens automatically. But I see many customers put an inventory account here on these items, and then you will not be able to reconcile your inventory afterwards, because the service items are not part of your on-hand inventory. They don't exist from an inventory standpoint. So it's very important to put a profit loss account here when you purchase the items. And I will hand over the microphone to Johan to execute the production.
Thank you very much, Anders. So now I'm going to show you the scheduling and ordering of the discrete product. So based on customer demand, I'm going to create a production order, and I'll switch to the application. Go to the production control. I'll create a new order. So now I'm creating the new production order, and based on my current capacity in the factory, I've decided to outsource this production order or the coding operation on the production order. So I here switch the BOM to the 801 vendor, and as goes for the route. So now I both have the route and the bill of material that is for the vendor 801. So I'm going to create the order. Here it is in status created. I'll estimate it. And then I'll go ahead and schedule it. And I'll schedule it backward from a scheduling date that I set. Let's say Friday, on Friday. So now it's scheduled. So let's look at the bill of material. I can look at the references, and what I see here is, of course, that I have different raw materials dates, because the material is required on different date by the different operations. I can also see that a purchase order has been generated by the service item in the bill of material, and of course this purchase order line has a delivery date that corresponds with the planned finish of the external operation. So now it's been scheduled, and I'm actually good to go and start my production order. So I'll do that.
You want to complete release purchase order?
Yeah, so good idea. So we have this purchase order. I need to release it, confirm it. I can do that. So I'll use the shortcut here. So I'll go to the references and then the view details. And here we have the purchase order with the service item. And I need to confirm that because we confirm for the vendor, yes, we are going to purchase the coating. And I'm good to start my production order. And the first operation, as you remember, it's an internal operation. It consumes two materials. So I'll start working on the first operation. I'll report on that operation with the production job card journal. You could also do it from the manufacturing execution system. But here we have the first one. I've spent some time, half an hour, and I reported 10. Good. I'll mark the operation as complete, and I will also mark bomb consumption. And that indicates that I'm flushing the materials that is consumed by this operation. So here we go. I post the journal. Completing the first operation. So that actually is completing the first demo. If I go and look at the journals, I can see I have my picking list journal that was automatically generated when I posted my job card journal consuming the two materials.
So the next step, basically now the first operation is done. So now we need to get the material and the semi-finished out to the subcontractor. So we do need to stage the material at the subcontractor. There's two ways of doing that. We already had a little bit talked about that earlier on. There's the MIP planning-driven way of doing it, where the subcontractor is defined as an own warehouse, and all my planning configuration basically directs the material to be actually planned for that warehouse. It can be purchased to that warehouse. It can be purchased from the subcontractor, but it also can be transferred through transfer order, transfer journal, or withdrawal Kanban to that subcontractor. And obviously, it could also be safety stock driven, so it could also be auto replenishing. I'm not seeing that too much in the field. I wonder why, because it simplifies things and it actually could help reducing lead times. But again, this can only be done if you run it on a contract basis. I mean, you don't move material to somebody without having a frame contract of the whole operation. And probably that is a little bit the blocker. I mean, I've worked 15 years in the automotive supplier industry. There it is standard. Outside of the automotive supplier industry, it's not so standard. But it's actually maybe a good idea for other industries to try that. Shortens lead times. The other one is the order-driven, but that means that you kind of have to make sure that for every order, you actually prepare the material and send it out to the subcontractor, order by order. We're going to show that version today. So there's a specific way in production that actually, where you can actually use it on an order-driven way, where you're using the production pick list for that operation to actually prepare the document, what has to be picked, and then send out, and Johan is going to show that. The other part of a way of doing it order-driven, if you still want to use transfer orders or purchase order at the subcontractor, then you can use the packed supply, because packed supply would then automatically drive the order-specific purchase to be shipped at the subcontractor, or the order-specific transfer, or a bomb line event Kanban. And you can also do that in the case of production orders. You can use a withdrawal event Kanban to pull the material to the subcontractor as well. But now Johan is going to show you the version where we're staging order-driven with the picking list.
Yes, thank you. So the external operation, the coding operation at our vendor is about to start. We are then shipping the semi-finished and also a material out to the vendor in order for him to start the operation. The way we ship that is, as Conrad told you, by using the picking list. So I'm going to create a new picking list. And I will associate the purchase order that was generated to this picking list. And then I will add the line for the product that we are shipping to the vendor. And it's this one. And we are consuming.
How do you know that that's what you're shipping to the vendor?
Well, this is the additional product that you need to. And
I know that.
Yeah.
But how does someone know that?
That is not in the production case. It's unfortunately it's not that easy to. I mean, you have to know.
Yeah. Okay. And from the picking list journal, we can print out the delivery note. This is used as a consumption journal and the internal picking list, but we also have the option to use it as a delivery note. So you have this option to tick this one. And I also have a purchase order on the picking list journal. Then it will change the layout and be a delivery note for that, for the semi-finished and for the material. So now it's a vendor delivery note that goes out with the semi-finished and the material. So I can go ahead
So there's one obvious downside of this implementation. I don't know, maybe somebody has an idea how to overcome that, but obviously the semi-finish is not on the list. It's only represented by the purchase order that actually tells you that this is a semi-finished. It's one of the differences. You're going to see that the same scenario with Lean afterwards, where you have the semi-finished on the list.
Okay. I go ahead and post it, so it's now consumed by the production order. So that concludes the demo of the staging and the shipping to the vendor. It's the same. It's the same report. It has a different. It has two layouts incorporated in the report. Yeah. Picking list. Yeah. So the external operation is going on now, and once it's finished, yeah. There's a question.
Did you send the purchase order and the delivery note to them?
Well, yeah. Well, that's up to you. I mean, in a contract, kind of, if you have like a closed contract, you can actually put both papers together and send it out. You could also obviously send the purchase order upfront via EDI or mail or whatever. Whenever the purchase order is created when you estimate the order.
Okay. So in the next scenario I'm going to show you is when we receive semi-finished from the vendor, and that is of course received through the purchase order. So I'm going to switch, and then I'm going back to the purchase order. Here it is, and I'm going to do product receipt. For simplicity, I'm going to do it directly on the purchase order. And I will enter the packing slip number and then update it. Okay, I used this product receipt number before, so I'll try to select a different one. And it's now received. I get a lot of info here. And what this basically is saying is that I received the service item, I received the semi-finished good. The service item is accounted for in the production order, and the external operation is completed.
And the material is backflushed at the vendor as well.
Yeah.
If there's material states at the vendor warehouse.
Yeah.
Can you just show us the policy you're using? I believe it's on the production parameters that would say the purchase order receipt will trigger this.
Yeah, I'll not go into that detail now. We don't have the time for it, but you can come up and we can take it offline.
Missing policy to make everything you
Sure, there's a lot of policy behind this. So you can come
But
up
you're
and-
completely
yeah,
right. Yeah, there's
yeah.
a parameter in a manufacturing parameter that actually enables this automatic posting of,
Yeah.
of the purchase
Yeah.
order. There is
Question?
Have you got any plans to switch from everything trigger and estimate? Because if you run a master planning and obviously you firm an order that you maybe not you firm in 2 weeks out, it's automatically creating that purchase order. Where ideally I would like to create the purchase order on release of the production order, or I'd like to create the withdrawal Kanban on release. This everything getting created on estimate doesn't seem.
Yeah, it is something. It is something we have in mind, especially because obviously one of the problems, if you estimate and then send it out and then schedule, actually you send out the wrong date. I mean, you're right. But this is actually valid for the whole packed supply. All packed supply right now is created there, and yes, we have thought about maybe changing that and making it more flexible. And it's also something we need to take into account with release being actually the state where the warehouse work is actually starting. It can also overlap because that might be too late for the purchase order. But being more flexible there, that is something we definitely have in mind. Yeah.
Yeah. So coming back, you can see the production journal here that it was flushed both the service item and one of the products that was consumed in operation 20. So now everything is received by the vendor, from the vendor, and
You want to go on where?
yeah. So what is left now is to end the last operation. That's an internal operation. So I'll again use the job card journal, create a new one, and then put in the time I spent on this, the good quantity. I mark the operation as completed, materials I consume on that operation, and then I can also mark the production reported as finished, only possible on the last operation in the route, indicating that I'm not going to produce anymore on this production order. So that concluded the demo of the discrete scenario.
So now the operations are done, and what is missing now is that we end the production orders, which is normally done either as a batch or by individual managers in the operations weekly or in a batch run. So if we go in and end the production order, because this is where all the costing is actually happening on the production order. So we will go in and end the production order as the final step. And what will happen now is, in this case, we're doing standard cost, if you haven't seen it on the costing versions, but we're doing standard cost. So I will see which variances has occurred on this production order. And again, as I said earlier, when I'm doing this 50-50, as I'm doing here, I don't care really of the specific production orders. But anyway, for this scenario here, we will just go in and look at the specific production order. And we can go to the variance directly, and we can put on the details, and we can actually see here that we have our coding process, which is that we didn't actually use anything because we didn't actually do the coding in-house. This was a subcontractor, so we can see that we actually didn't use anything. So that is why we get a quantity variance on that one. And then, therefore, also, some of the variances here per production order is more difficult to look at. But again, as a cost controller, I have already proven that because I chose a 50-50 production. And that means I will have the cost groups of each of the components with a 50-50 split. And when we then do production, if we don't produce it, and we cannot produce a 50-50 production order at the same time, so I will get variances on the one I'm not consuming. How do I then go and look at it in an overall base? If we close down the form here, what I can do as a user, let me get back to the production order here. I can get back to the inventory management, and I can go under reports. And I can go here under analysis, and here we have the variance analysis statement, which is where the cost controller can go in and build and variance analytics on that specific produced item, and you can get the variances over a period of time to see how you were producing that item and which variances occurred. And this is where you can build up the graph on that report to see, did we actually even produce the item 50/50 as we expected to do? And I can also go in and see after that, on top of that, did we actually create variances on the production that we need to go in or adjust either the production, so I can go back to the operation manager and say, you constantly overproduce or use cost on this specific cost group, meaning you need to look into that specific operation and do something about it. Or it might be true that it actually costs more to produce it than what we estimated in the beginning of the year when we actually set our standard cost.
Okay, so that was the discrete manufacturing version. So now let's look at how the same scenario looks when we're using lean manufacturing subcontracting, or as we called it, activity-based subcontracting. No, I have to stay here. So in activity-based subcontracting using lean manufacturing, it is slightly different. One thing that is different is that we're using Kanbans to move material between us and the subcontractor and move them back. And we also have a Kanban for the semi-finished. So there's actually a document and a reference that actually addresses this move. All the reference, material reference to the semi-finish is actually done through the end item, through the final item. So the Kanban carries the number of the final item. When it's, as always in Kanban, if you create the Kanban, it has the number of the end item, and that travels with it. And that's also what we're showing and what we're using. So the item arrival would also be booked through the Kanban. The service is ordered just the same with the service ID. However, this is not an inventoried service ID. It's a non-inventoried service ID because we don't need that for costing. It has a different costing concept. So the cost calculation will actually consider the service directly on that. We also don't need the service to be part of the BOM because the relation of the service is done on the activity. The activity knows this is subcontracted and which service is used to actually do this subcontracting. So all the green operations in the flow are done with the reference to the product, and the blue ones are done with the reference to the service item. The other thing that is fundamentally different is that the point in time where you create the purchase order doesn't really matter. Your point, Darren? So you can actually create the purchase order after the fact, after you've received the Kanban, you can still create it there. You don't have to do it up front. And we will show that as well. So the production flow looks pretty much the same. This is our lean production flow. We have the normal, the in-house operations, pre-assembly, coating, and finish. And we have two activities for coating at the two vendors. So this is one production flow that has all these activities. It's not like in the other case, I need a route per specific. I have one that actually has all the activities modeled. And only by the Kanban rules, I'm defining which route I'm taking through this production flow for a specific case. We have modeled a second production flow here that is for the material replenishment. That is for the additional products that I need to move to the subcontractor. I have defined 3 Kanban rules that actually move material from my main material warehouse to either the internal production or to the warehouses of the subcontractors. As I said earlier on, I can also use this to replenish the discrete production. I could use the same principle, creating Kanbans to actively replenish the material there. So I'm using transfer activities from material warehouse to consumption supermarkets. And the Kanban rules can be, replenishment strategies here can be fixed quantity scheduled or Kanban line events. And then finally, I can transfer this together with Kanbans from semi-finished goods to the Kanban transfer board. So you will see in the same board, you see the semi-finished goods that you want to move out and the materials. And we're going to show that. So let's look at the configuration of these two. So again, we need to look at the resource groups and resources first. Then we're looking at the BOM. and at the production flows and activities, and finally at the Kanban rules. So my resource groups, these are the ones with the L down here, A1 or L. It's a resource group marked as a work cell, has an input warehouse 11, output warehouse 12. I have the internal coding, this one in subcontracting, and then I have the finished that consumes from this location. My subcontracted versions have an own warehouse. Again, input and output are the same. And I'm using, in this model, I'm using transfer activities to move from and to those subcontractors. It is again important that the subcontracted work cell have one resource of type vendor, basically to define what is the vendor actually used in this resource group. So let's go to the item, just to show the BOM. We have a similar item like we showed first. And as you can see, it consists of 4 activities. It does not need a service item, and I only have one version of the BOM. I don't need multiple versions in this case. So let's look at how this is configured. So I'm starting with the production flows. So I have this production flow configured here. As I explained earlier, I have these 5 process activities. They're part of one flow. And all cases are actually built on those. I have the pre-assembly, I have the code internally, the finish, and then the external coding. The speciality on the external coding is that subcontracted activities. So if it uses a resource group that is vendor managed, then it would automatically ask you to create what we call service term, which is a relation to a purchase agreement that uses a service. So now the system knows whatever this activity is planned or executed, what is the way of calculating the service that you need and ordering the service and receiving the service in parallel. This is quite flexible to do. You can also define what is the quantity base. Is it job? Is it the good quantity of the items? Is it the total quantity or the activity time that is actually the basis here? And you can also kind of define a ratio. So you can basically calculate out of the jobs, you can calculate what is the quantity of service that you need per job. Then I also have these transfers, and if you look at the coding activity, then at the subcontractor, you can basically see that the predecessor is the transfer semi-finished to the subcontractor, and the successor is transfer semi-finished from the subcontractor back to in-house. But there's another activity sitting here, which is replenishing the material at the subcontractor that also goes into that warehouse. And this relationship, it actually points to another production flow, and this relationship allows me to actually throw event Kanban through the relationship to another production flow, so I replenish my material. So this is the other production flow that is very simple. It consists only of 3 transfer activities and a dummy activity, which is basically only there because there's a constraint in the production flow that says everything has to be connected. And obviously there's not really a connection, but so I make a dummy activity that I've never used to connect everything. So now we have seen the production flows. Let's see the Kanban rules that we set up. So to make it more focused, let's start with the production. So what we've defined here is that we have 3 scheduled Kanban rules for the internal coating and for the 2 alternatives. So the scheduled rules, the internal, consist of 2 activities, the internal coating and the finish in one. The external ones consist of 1 activity more. It basically consists of coating at a subcontractor, transfer back, and then finish. So that basically means that whenever I'm scheduling something for finish, I'm selecting which subcontractor I use for the coating as well, and that is where actually the job for the coating is created. On top of that, I have 2 other quantities, or actually 3 other Kanban rules. For the pre-assembly, the first operation is done in a second Kanban rule here, so it's not tied together. What we're actually doing in this scenario, the pre-production is done to fixed quantity Kanbans in an internal supermarket, and then it's transferred out to the vendors or used internally. This is just one way. I mean, you could have done completely different approaches here. It's just one way we decided to do. So we're doing the pre-production to a supermarket. From there, we're actually replenishing all the 3 possible work cells. We have done it still done it a little bit different. So in one case, and that's the one that we're going to show in detail, we actually after the production, we're transferring it directly to the subcontractor. So this subcontractor has a fixed quantity Kanban rule, so he gets Kanbans of material, and whenever he has consumed them, he sends the cards or the bins back, and then they registered as empty, and then he gets new cards. The alternative for the other subcontractor is an event. So in this case, we're doing it the other way around. That when I schedule the final assembly, it creates my subcontracting activity for 802. And also creates a pool, say now transfer this material to that subcontractor. So this is actually showing the other alternative pull to order through an event. And I could have gone one step further, pulling it directly, kind of produce to order the pre-production and the pre-assembly, but we're not doing that. So this is the production flow and the Kanban rules. So now we can basically start with looking into the cost configuration of that.
Yeah, and I will do it fast because I can see we are close on time. So I'll just say that the calculation is actually the same that you're doing. You're doing a BOM for this finished good, and it goes to the Kanban flow because it actually on the product you specified that you want to produce this based on Kanban. This is your default order type. So that is how it's going to calculate it. And the other difference is, just as Conrad said, there is no service item, so it's easier to configure. And that's really it. And in the end, we have to do backflow costing. And there's another thing is that, of course, this have to be standard cost right now, also the raw materials and the finished good, because here we are using lean as the way of costing in AX and backflow costing, and that requires today in AX that you do standard cost as an inventory evaluation method on all your items.
So one command on what I showed you earlier on this special route that I had for calculation of the mixed model, I could do the same thing for subcontracting, which would basically mean I would need to do a special production flow that actually consists of a mix of all activities in a row, and then basically use that to calculate the mixed model of subcontracting. We didn't do that for this. That would carry us a little bit too far. Okay, so with that, let's look at how this is actually done.
Okay, so like in the discrete example, I'm going to schedule based on customer demand, Kanbans for the coming period. So I go to the application.
Sorry, did you already there?
It was already there.
Yes.
Okay. And then I go to the Kanban schedule board for the last Kanban activity. It opens here. And here you see the schedule board. You see the different days and the Kanbans that are planned for the different days. If we take a closer look at this Kanban, it has two activity. It has a code internally, and then the finish activity, which is going on in this cell. So this indicates that this is a Kanban flow that goes on internally. We could take a look at a different Kanban. This one. So this has the code external at the 802 vendor, and then a transfer activity that transfers it from the vendor back to us, and then the finish activity. So we have the different Kanbans planned in this cell. Down here we have the three different Kanban rules, and if we want to create a new Kanban, we can, based on which rule we want to use, select this and then use the create Kanban function. We'll have a due date, so we'll plan based on a delivery date or a due date, and we also indicate or specify the number of Kanbans that we want to schedule. So now we have two Kanban activities under the Kanban, so a new scheduled Kanban was put up in the board. So this is kind of equals the process of creating the production order. Here I create and plan the Kanbans for the coming period.
Can you open the details for that and maximize it?
So for the Kanban?
For this one.
That was a new Kanban I created.
So this is the one we just created. So you can see two things here. You can see the operations, the coding at 802, transfer from 802 finish. But you can also see the packaging, what is actually pulling. So you can see the packaging to the subcontracted item that's actually pulled from, and you can then further see the packaging to the replenishment of the 802. So in this case, this Kanban pulls the semi-finished and the material to the subcontractor, versus if we're looking at the other Kanban of the second rule. This was the internal one. I need to use this one then. This doesn't have any pegging because this one we're actually replenishing through fixed quantity Kanbans. So now we'll actually walk you through that example of the fixed quantity Kanbans.
Okay. So moving on to the next demo. So now we are going to start the Kanban or the production, and we're starting with completing the first Kanban activity. So I'm going to the process board, Kanban board for process jobs, and I need to switch. And then I select the right cell. It should be this one. It's the pre-assembly. So here we have the Kanbans or the Kanban activities for the first Kanban activity in the flow. The first one are completed. So I could start looking at this Kanban again. To get more information, I can go to the Kanban and I can see that this is pre-assembled and then it's transferred to 801. So this Kanban is going out to the vendor for the coding operation. Looking at the other one, it only has a pre-assembly, so this goes to our internal coding. So
maximize that form.
This one?
Just maximize the form.
Then I'm going to I'm going to complete these two Kanbans. Before doing that, I'm going to look at the picking list. And here I have an aggregated view of the material demand for the selected Kanbans. This supply status that you see here indicates that I have material on hand on my Kanban input location. So I can go ahead and start my Kanbans. So I'll prepare the Kanbans. And that changed the status, so now they are in status prepared. start the Kanban, and then I'll complete the Kanban. So this was the first, this was the demo of completing the first Kanban activity. Pretty simple way to complete the jobs.
So there's one little thing to look at here is that you actually look at the Kanban quantity overview of the finished goods. So basically what's sitting outside of this, what's sitting behind this operation. And you have two Kanban rules here, the one that actually fills the internal supermarket, and then you have the second one that fills the external one. You can see that the one that we just completed is only partially completed because there is a transfer missing. So there's still a transfer activity to be completed.
Yeah. And that transfer activity is to take the semi-finished good out to the coding vendor. So that would be the next demo, that we are now shipping the semi-finished and the two components out to the vendor. So that would be our water spider that is staging and shipping these materials.
You may have remarked we actually didn't create the purchase order yet. We forgot to do it, but it doesn't matter. We do it afterwards.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open the Kanban board for transfer jobs. I'm going to filter on the vendor 801 warehouse. And then I'm going to find the materials that I'm going to ship to stage. This is one of them. This is the other one. Looking at the picking list, these are available. And then I'm also going to select the semi-finished for transferring. And I identify that semi-finished by the Kanban card. And this was actually the card that no, it was not that. Let's see what this is. I should have
just check the gray ones. It must be gray. No, not this one.
Not that
Just check all the gray ones.
Okay. No, it's not that one. No. This is
Shouldn't have written down the card number.
Yeah, I should have written down the card number. Not that
No,
one.
not again. Something.
Strange.
Didn't you complete that card?
So I'll go back to the process board. This one
Yes. That should be it.
is 257. So going back to the transfer
Yeah,
board.
it wasn't started.
Okay. And now I forgot what is 26, the card number?
257. Take this one and one green and one blue. 257. First one that you have.
257 is that one?
Yes.
And then we have the material and that one.
Okay.
So finally, everything is on hand and I can complete the transfer. So I'll jump directly to complete.
So what we're not showing here is that in AX 2012 R2, there is an integration to WMS2 and the shipment there. So you could actually have created a shipment for that, put everything on a bill of lading, get actually a list of bill of lading. A Kanban is basically one box on the bill of lading. So you could actually have the shipment documents prepared to that. That is something that is not fully integrated into the transport management and WMS2, something on our list to complete in the future.
Okay. So going back, the next step is that now we stage the material to the vendor. The vendor operation is now finished, and we are receiving the semi-finished good again at our own warehouse. So Ahmed will do the receiving. So that is the next demo. So he'll go.
I mean, as this is a milk run, the truck arrives. So the first thing is he's going to unload things, and but now we have prepared what he sends out. So he's going to unload, send out what he gets, and now he's going to scan in everything that he has received from the vendor.
Yeah. So I'm opening the process board that represents the vendor 801. And I have the Kanban here, so I can here complete the Kanban.
Can you maximize that for me?
Yes. So I'm going to complete the Kanban. So it indicates that the subcontracting operation has now finished and is received by our doc.
Can you stay there? You're not.
So,
No process.
No, sorry. It's process. No.
So we're looking again at the Kanban board here. So if you look at this, so this is the overview of the work cell at this subcontractor. So what you can actually see is what are the jobs that are due to be delivered. But you can also see what material has been staged there, because this is your representation of the supermarket at the vendor now, as of now. So with the semi-finished, he also gets back cards, empty cards. So he will basically either scan these empty cards or will kind of mark the number of bins he's getting back. And I have to do kind of the multi-select. So let's assume he just gets one box of each back, and then he can also basically can declare them empty here. And that means now, as this subcontractor is replenished with semi-finished, this is the point where it would actually create new cards to be produced and to be shipped out to the subcontractor. And again, if you're using circulating cards, you would just use the scanner mode for that and just scan them empty when he gets it back from the subcontractor.
So in the last demo, we are completing the last activity, like we completed the last operation on the discrete production. So I'm going to the process board for the last activity.
Display?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks.
So it's this one, subcontracting finish. And I have the job here. I also have a transfer job that I need to complete. I'll do that from here. So completing the transfer activity from contractor. So selecting this Kanban. And then I have the
So this transfer job back is a little bit optional. It was so whether you model a transfer back or not is kind of up to you in that scenario. One thing that we didn't really show is that we also subcontracted the transfers. So we're not only paying a vendor for the service, we are also paying a vendor for actually the vendor that does the milk runs per box of shipping. So we're creating a purchase order and a receipt relative to all Kanbans that actually have been transferred back and forth.
So what would have been on the purchase agreement for vendor 802? And
Yeah.
what would have been on the release?
Sorry?
What would have been on the purchase agreement?
On the purchase agreement for vendor 801 and 802, we have a service. We have a subcontracted service.
Just the service?
Just a service. And we have another service for the transfer to another vendor.
So I'm going to complete the transfer. Now the transfer indicates they are back. I can start completing the last activity. So I'll just select complete. And that completes the demo of completing the last activity.
So the one thing that we did not do yet is creating all the documents for that. We've been very lazy. We could have done it upfront, but so we just do it now. So the subcontracting documents are created, basically the purchase order and the purchase receipts are created based on the completed Kanbans or on the planned Kanbans. So if I want to actually switch that, if I want to do everything, if I want to create the purchase orders for everything, is that accurate? Here, that's accurate. Then I run this job. I can select the production flow. I can select a specific activity or Kanban rule. I don't do any of those. I just run the creation of the purchase orders. And you can see it actually creates me 3 purchase orders, for each of the subcontractor, one for the Kanbans that I have planned for him. So after I'm scheduling, I can actually start ordering it. And then also for the vendor who does the transfers, I'm creating the transfers as well. I can do the same thing after the fact. I created the I have to check this. So now for all completed ones, I'm creating the receipt on that. So it automatically create and post the receipt of all the services for all the Kanbans that I have actually received. And if I have Kanbans where I say I'm only paying for good quantity, then depending on what I actually key in as good quantity on the item arrival, I would get a different receipt and a different payment for that. This payment of the service would automatically be loaded on the production flow and would be considered on the backflash costing. So backflash costing would be an own session on its own. So we're not doing this right now. So we want to end the session here. We are also around time to actually end it. We want to end with a small comparison of the 2 models that we showed today. So production operations and subcontracting and activity-based subcontracting, the 2 sides of the same scenario. In one case, we have a service item that has inventory control, and you have to put it in the BOM. In the other case, you have a non-inventory control service item. It is not in the BOM. It is only related to the activity that you perform. The service order is created in one case with the estimation. In the other case, it is very flexible. You can do it. You can, after scheduling, you can do it after you start. You can do it whatever. You can do it after the fact. It doesn't matter. The material staging at the subcontracting is actually something that could be mixed. You can mix both approaches. You can use transfer orders. You can use Kanbans. You can pull to order. You can use event Kanbans. You can use event transfer orders, event purchase orders. That is very, very flexible. Depends on the model that actually has to be done. Staging of semi-finished item is indirectly through the picking list, but it's actually not on the picking list. In this case, staging of semi-finished item is through the transfer of a Kanban, just like material that you stage. So it is a more uniform process. The receipt of semi-finished is through the item arrival of the service, basically of the purchase order on the one side. In the other side, we're just receiving the Kanban out of a work cell, just like internally. And costing, we have basically all options for costing for production orders in the case of the subcontracting. The subcontracting service, though, is seen as material. So in your cost blocks, it would always be in the material block. It will not be, and also from an accounting perspective, it would be in the material accounts. It will not be in a labor account or something like that. Whereas in the other case, costing is using backflash costing, and the service is actually even in an own cost block. It has its own cost block, which is called semi-finished subcontracting. So you can actually very detailed see what was your cost component in from the subcontracting part. Are there any remaining questions?
Switch that back just for a moment.
So obviously, this you get this detailed session. Some of the detailed information we switched over a little bit. We were pretty tough on time, but we made it. So you get that downloaded from customer source and partner source. There's a lot of detailed notes also in that. I'm actually thinking about maybe writing a white paper on that scenario to actually explain it in more detail. Also, I don't know if that is a good idea. If somebody would appreciate it, okay. So maybe I'll take the time and push my colleagues to help me. Any other questions? Yes.
Wondering about how we can integrate an outbound flow in the new WMS system with the first scenario. Whether we could actually use some process within the WMS with the
Well, this has two components. One component is if you want to use the handheld to register the subcontracting the work cells in Lean, you can basically do that if it's related to a put away. Right now, it's only working if it's related to a put away. We need to think of a more flexible integration of that. You're absolutely right. We did not have the time to do that yet, to actually do all this, especially the subcontracting integration, because the other part would be also kind of the question, well, what about the movement to the replenishment of the subcontractor? Right now, you have this obstacle that, well, the warehouse of the subcontractor is a different warehouse. You don't create cross-warehouse work. Can we do this with kind of location? I don't know. Maybe we would need to think this whole scenario through with a different approach as well. And I'm planning to do that with my colleagues, but we're not there yet. Okay, then thank you for being here. I hope it was a little bit interesting for you. Please remember to fill out the feedback form. We'd appreciate that. And I hope to see many of you in the next session on the Ask the Experts on Manufacturing, right here on the same room, I think. It's LL3?
No, it's here.
It's in this room.
Well, we'll find the room. See you there. Thank you.